Knowledge for Men, Episode 3. Welcome to KnowledgeForMen.com, where boys turn into men, where men turn into leaders, into lions, the ferocious few who stand strong, a place where you grow to become the man you were born to be. It's time to take massive action towards the life you want. Get the health, get the relationships, business, and career you've always dreamed of. Achieve a level of success and happiness that you've been searching for so many years. Life has given you enough, and it's time to take a stand and take full control of your life. Stand with us as we interview the most inspiring and successful leaders to give you real-world advice to crush life and awaken the sleeping giant inside of you. All right, guys, let's get the show started. I'm here with three-time New York Times best-selling author Robert Greene. He is best known for his books, The 48 Laws of Power, Art of Seduction, 33 Strategies of War, and most recently, Mastery. Robert, I'm very happy to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. My pleasure.
All right, let's go right into your favorite success quote and why.
I got several quotes. I do so much research for my books. I like the quote of Benjamin Disraeli that goes, "Never complain, never explain. Just let your actions speak for themselves." Then I love Marcus Aurelius. I have tons of quotes from Marcus Aurelius, but I use them in my books. And one of them is about if two people are in a boxing ring and they're going at each other, you don't complain about the other person's moves as if maybe they're evil or their intentions are bad. You just accept it as part of the game. And that's what life should be like. It's like a game. It's like chess or a boxing ring. You're facing your adversaries, and you're not worrying about whether they're nice people or their intentions are good. You're looking at their actions, and you're strategizing accordingly.
All right. I like the quotes. And Robert, share with the audience your story. Share with the audience your personal journey of how you got started with what you do.
Well, it's a mix of a little bit of planning and a fair amount of luck, but a lot of persistence. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. I knew that was what I was destined to be, if you can use that word. And I wandered a lot. I never had a job more than 11 months in my entire life. I just tried everything from construction work. I lived in Europe, did every job in Europe, taught English, worked in journalism, Hollywood, television, a detective agency, an encyclopedia company, dug ditches in Greece. And it was all like very interesting experiences. And I learned a lot about people and how I saw every kind of power move that you can imagine, particularly in Hollywood. And then when I was 36 years old, so sort of late in life, I met a man who packages books, and he asked me if I had any ideas for books. And all of my life experience just came flooding out of me. All the maneuvers people had played on me, on other people, and all of my reading of history. What I told him turned into the 48 Laws of Power. So I can't say that I planned my life to write the 48 Laws of Power. That would be ridiculous. But in a weird, intuitive way, I had prepared myself for some kind of book, some kind of movie, some sort of project that would have eventually come out of me. And it kind of aligns with what I'm talking about in Mastery, about the apprenticeship phase. I'd given myself, in a weird way, sort of the perfect apprenticeship for writing Mastery. And after that first book, The 48 Laws of Power, everything just kind of took off and had gained its own momentum.
Well, you've definitely had your fair share of ups and downs with all the different jobs that you've had in different multiple industries. Well, I've noticed that in your books, it seems like you're referencing history quite a lot to prove your points. What is the importance of history in your writing?
Well, you have this sort of storehouse in history of all of this incredible drama of these people in our past, our heritage, who've done amazing deeds, credible discoveries, great political maneuvers, great generals like Napoleon. And then you have other people who just make all sorts of incredible mistakes. And the lessons that you can learn from reading history are just amazing. And times change and people change, and they didn't have the internet back when Napoleon was a general, and things looked differently. But human nature is what it is. People have egos, insecurities. You're dealing with the same political stuff. The human brain is essentially the same. And so you can kind of look and see, like a laboratory, of what people did right, what they did wrong. And so for me, I don't read history just to enjoy it. I read it for lessons. Everything I read, no matter who it is, I'm going, now what is that saying about me? What is that saying about what people are like? And that's just sort of my approach.
So you're looking into history and learning from the mistakes of others.
Well, there's nothing to be, you can't learn everything from a book, and you can't learn everything from history. It's a combination. But as you said, you can benefit from the mistakes that other people have made, and you can learn from them. And then it's a combination of things. You want to be alive in the moment. You want to be looking at what people are doing around the world in your little circle. And at the same time, you have all of this knowledge of psychology that you can apply that you've learned from the past. So it's not a question of just being brilliant at knowing a lot of history. That's not going to make you successful either.
Yeah, I see. So you're learning from history and you're taking out the lessons from history and applying them into the present day. And that shows up in your writings to help others.
Yeah, no, when I take someone like a Napoleon Bonaparte, who I consider the greatest strategist who ever lived, and anybody who's in business or an entrepreneur or whatever, strategy is the science of how to get what you want. He's the greatest who ever lived. So when I read his story, which is an amazing story, I want to show the reader that he's a human being in the course of a battle in very stressful moments. He was a very creative individual when it came to strategy. So I want to say, what are the lessons that we can learn from him? And one of the main lessons is he's very fluid, a very fluid thinker. He's not someone who's got these set rules that he has absorbed from all of military history. He's alive in the moment. He's able to kind of improvise, etc. Incredibly applicable to the world today. So I look at Napoleon, and that's how I look at everybody. How could I apply that to our very complex, difficult, competitive world that we live in?
I do respect that, being a history buff myself. But what is it about power that really intrigues you? It seems like power is a main theme in many of your books.
Well, it's like the dirty little secret in society. People will talk about sex. They'll talk about every little, they'll reveal who they are, everything, but nobody wants to talk about power. I was in Hollywood working for film directors. I was a writer myself, and I saw people were extremely power hungry. That's how they measured themselves by. Am I rising up in Hollywood? Are people seeing me as a up and coming director, producer? What's my reputation, my power? Not about the art or what they were producing. They were obsessed with power, but nobody writes about what people do. What happens when the door is closed? What are the guys leading Google? How are their minds functioning? We read what's in the newspaper, but it's not reality. It's not what's really going on. The game is different. And I've seen the game in all these different jobs. I wanted to expose it because I don't like this kind of hypocrisy that exists where people use these laws, but no one is talking about them. And I've always, and whenever I was a kid and I watched sports, for instance, I love sports, I'm interested in the strategy, the mind game. You watch like the World Series now. I mean, my favorite sport's basketball, but I love football. But you watch the World Series, it's so mental. One team you can sense is in a groove, and and the mental part is incredible. On the strategic level, I'm fascinated with that in business, in science, in sports, in any venture. So that's sort of my personal obsession.
Okay, and what do you have to say about the people who view some of your work as a form of manipulation, specifically the 48 Laws of Power and the Art of Seduction?
Well, it's very manipulative of people to say that because there's a lot of the 48 laws that really aren't manipulation. So there's a law, always say less than necessary, which is, you tend to talk too much. People tend to talk too much. And when you talk a lot, you probably will say something stupid. Now, if you want to call that a manipulation, that's kind of stretching it. It's just basic common sense. It's wisdom that the less you speak, the more likely you are to not say something stupid. And you also appear kind of powerful. That's not a manipulative law. I could quote, half the laws are like that. They have to do with kind of persuading people and understanding other people's psychology. Then there are laws that are manipulative, yes. There's brutal laws like crush your enemy totally. There's manipulative laws like pose as a friend but work as a spy, things like that. I'm simply saying that that's part of the game. That's what happens in the real world. If you want a book about ethics, you can find 3,000 books on the bookshelves right now about how to be a nice person. But that's not what power is about. So, for instance, there's a law in there that is quite manipulative, which is get others to do the work but always take the credit. And people will go, well, how can you talk about that? That's so evil. That's so awful. I'm sorry, but that's how business works. In Hollywood, people were constantly using what I wrote when I was starting out. My name never appeared. You watch a newscaster on television, you watch a politician give a talk. They don't write their own talk, their own speech. They put their name on it. We go, what a brilliant speech by Barack Obama, but somebody else wrote it. Or some newscaster, Bill O'Reilly, he's not doing his own research and writing what he says. Somebody else is doing it. He puts his name on it. That's how life is. And I'm pointing out that that's how the game is played. And if you're not aware of it, you're going to get defensive and upset. You're going to go, damn it, why did that guy steal my idea? And I'm saying, no, be smart, be strategic. So I'm revealing to you how the game is played. If you want to call that evil, then what you're saying is business is evil and people are evil. Well, that's your conclusion. But I want to give it to you straight.
So you're just pointing it out that this is what's going on in the real world and people should be aware of it.
Yes, and be aware and not be so naive. I was naive myself when I entered the work world. I had a degree in the humanities and filled with literature, which it was a great education. But I was naive. I didn't understand that people would be doing these kinds of things. And so it was a hard education in life. And so a lot of the laws aren't about, I don't want you necessarily, you're not going to go out there and crush your enemy totally. That's kind of silly concept. And if you read the chapter, I'm not talking about you as a 25-year-old working in an office that you're crushing people. But I want you to be aware of what others are doing, what the people in power might be doing. So you're not so naive. So you're armed with knowledge. Maybe later you'll use some of these laws. Maybe you won't, but you'll understand how the game is being played.
You make a good point there. And in your books, it seems like there's a common theme other than power, which is really, I was talking about the art of seduction and 48 laws of power, but it seems like there's a common theme amongst all of your books. Could you share with the audience what that is?
I'd say it's realism. I call it hardcore realism or radical realism. That's what I used in the 50th law. Basically, we live in a world where there's a lot of bullshit. People are just covering things up. They're not saying what's really going on in the world. And I just want to give it to you straight. So The Art of Seduction, my second book, people were very upset that I used the word victim in there. As opposed, like the person that you're seducing is your victim. But to me, seduction is an inherently transgressive, naughty, dark art. If you make it a sunny, angelic, happy, everybody loves each other art, it's not seduction anymore. By its nature, there is a victim. And so I want to give it to you straight. And, that's sort of what covers all of the books. Mastery is a little bit different in some ways. It's not as dark and Machiavellian as the other books, but it's definitely a realistic look at yourself and your career. And chapter 2 of Mastery is called Submit to Reality. And that sort of pretty much sums it up. So it's the same approach, but maybe not quite as Machiavellian.
And on the subject of mastery, it seems like it does tell you that you can master a skill. It can happen. You put in your time and you will get there eventually through hard work. But what do you have to say about, in today, like I feel like Generation Y or even, our generation today, it's really about instant gratification.
Yeah.
We want the results now. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it comes down to the following point here. Do you really want power? Do you really want to be successful? Do you really want to master your field? If that's what matters to you, then drop the fairy tales about shortcuts and things you can learn in 4 hours or 4 weeks or 4 months, and look in the mirror and say it's going to take time. It's going to take 10,000 hours. I have a plan. It doesn't mean you have to do, if you read the book, I'm not saying you have to have one job and it's all like a linear thing, a stairway up to mastery. It involves zigzags, it involves several skills, but overall, you have an idea of where you want to be. It's 10 years from now. You, Andrew, want to have a media empire you on the internet or something. I don't know what it is, but you understand that it's going to take time. And there's no substitute for experience and skill. Because sometimes when you're like 21, 22, it's harder to understand. But maybe if you bring it down to something like music or sports, it's a little easier. Many people will have had the experience of playing the guitar or the piano or playing basketball or some sport. And in the beginning, you're awful at it. You don't understand the rules. You're awkward. It's not really fun because there's a lot of boring repetition and practice involved. And as you get through it and you get past that barrier of a couple of years, it starts getting more fun. What you thought you knew in the beginning isn't at all what the truth is. You understand the inside game, the mental aspect. You're no longer thinking about each maneuver on the court or whatever. You got an overall sense of what's going on, the same for music. That's a function of time. It's not going to happen in that first year. So are you someone that really wants to be good at what you do? Then accept it. Accept the reality and make it work for you. It works for you if you're patient and you go through it and you know it's going to take 10 years. It works against you if you want a shortcut, if you want to take some magic pill or read some book. Then everything that I'm talking about is reversed and you're never going to get very far in life. So it just comes down to, are you a realist and understand how the brain works, or do you live in a fairyland where, you can get whatever you want easily?
Okay, and what do you have to say about the guys who seem to have cheated this in society? Guys like, Instagram, 4 guys sold Instagram for $1 billion to Facebook. And Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg started this in his dorm room and boom, hundreds of millions of dollars. Now he's a billionaire, the youngest billionaire in the world. I mean, what do you have to say about those kind of guys?
Well, there's something to be said for that. And the jury is still out on Facebook. I mean, if you took to me and you had like in a boxing ring, you had the Google guys and Zuckerberg, meaning Page and Brin and Zuckerberg, and they were facing off in a boxing match, I'd put my money on Google. I think it's a better model. I think it's going to make more money in the end. And these are people who definitely followed the route of mastery, who spent years at Stanford, of going very deeply into algorithms, search engines, etc. So social media is a little more slippery when it comes to mastery. But I maintain in all of my books and in the next book that I'm writing that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is success early on. So there are plenty of stories of people who've made millions when they're 24, 25, even before the internet era. It happens. Do they last? Are they a one-hit wonder? Are they just going to cash in their $50, $100 million and that's it? If that's it, then they're not masters in my book. They did something interesting. I don't think it's pure luck. I don't think that somebody after 6 months comes up with something that's going to be. There's usually a period of preparation and apprenticeship. But I want to see whether these people are going to make it past, because what happens when you're very successful early on, you begin to think that you have the golden touch and you're not really learning from life. It's better, in my book, to have some failure when you're in your 20s than just have a string of success. It's probably going to go to your head and you're not going to be able to sustain it. So the jury's still out on Zuckerberg. He's a brilliant kid, no doubt. And he's very smart at the political game. But I'm still not totally convinced that 10 years from now, Facebook is going to be what Google is today. That's just how I feel.
That's an interesting point, bringing Zuckerberg and the Googles in a boxing ring. Yeah, I'd probably go with the Googles too. And is Zuckerberg a true master of his trade? I mean, he's successful financially, but we'll have to see in the future. So mastery is something that takes time.
Well, no, the model for me there was 50 when I did the book with 50 Cent, because in hip hop, it's pretty exaggerated, that phenomenon of the one hit wonder. There's just like probably 18,000 rappers out there who've had one hits or one album, and that's it. That's the majority. And 50 early on saw that. He saw that it kind of can kill you. And, he decided to diversify and make himself a businessman. He always thought of himself as a businessman and entrepreneur, and spread himself out and be playing the game to last and be smarter about it. And you might say, well, he's not the rapper that he was. And that's pretty true, but he's done very well for himself and is very successful and has lasted. That's, to me, mastery. And so, we can kind of judge it on that, whether someone just has one good album or whether they can sustain it over 10, 15, 20 years.
And while we're on this topic, this would actually be the opposite of someone who gets there really quick. But what about if someone's studying a skill for decades and they never amount to what they really aspire to be, and they're not making progress in their skill? They're just stagnant and no one knows about them.
Well, I don't know how many people are out there like that, and it's a good point, because maybe we don't know about them because nobody ever hears about them. And people have written to me saying, I've been painting as an artist for 25 years, and I've been doing it, and I've never had any success and all that. I mean, it does happen, but I think what happens in a lot of these instances is you're not quite in the right field necessarily. If you were really in love with what you do, it doesn't go stale. So a lot of people, they learn a skill and they just keep at it, and it becomes kind of dead and conventional and rote. They're a musician and they're just playing the same song over and over again, and they're good at it, but that's all. There's no creativity involved. It's not alive anymore. So if you choose a field where it is constantly challenging and changing, and you're excited and you're alive in the moment and you're learning, then I don't think after 20 years you're not going to have something to show for it. Now, maybe you won't be on the level of Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or whomever, but you're going to have something you're going to show for it. I think of my sister, for instance, who's an artist. She works in clay. She makes sculptures and pots. She's been doing it for 40 years. She is incredible. She's a total master of the craft. Now, she's not hugely successful in the art world for whatever reasons, but her work is incredible, and there are people who love it, and she's able to make a living. So there are, barriers. There are things that are going to stop you from being hugely successful. But also, I must say, money isn't the only barometer of mastery, and I make it over and over again. It's kind of, you choose a field that has a deep connection to you, and you love your work, and that's sort of the ultimate satisfaction. And usually what happens in those cases is the money will come to you at some point because you're so good at what you do. So I think for a lot of people who've been playing tennis for 20 years or painting or whatever, and nothing is happening, I think it's become dead for them. It's not something that they're loving, and they're not learning, and it just is like they're kind of like a rat going around in a circle, or a hamster.
So then they're in the wrong industry. They're in the wrong field. What can someone do then to find their passion or find the skill that they want to master?
Well, it's sort of like a cliche, find your passion. And I understand that it's easy and it sounds like something you put on your bumper sticker, but it's a little more complicated than that. That's why I write books that are 300 some pages. It's the problem that a lot of people have is they don't know, they're not connected to who they are. That's sort of the gist of mastery. You're listening so much to people on Facebook, to your parents, to your friends, and you're not listening to yourself. And you no longer know what you like, what foods you like, what music you really like, because you're just a patchwork of other people's opinions. And so then you're in your 20s and your 30s and you go, man, I don't even know what I like anymore. And people come to me and they go, I have no idea what you're talking about. My life's task, my calling. It's because you've gotten really far away from yourself and you got to reconnect. And, people deep down inside, you know it. You know it by the things that you hate. You said you quit your job 5 months ago, 6 months ago, probably because you reached a level of frustration and you realized, I don't like this. This isn't for me. Those kind of walls that you hit, they're telling you, okay, that's not for you. Now move a little bit, move towards what you love. you're trying out blogging and podcasting. You're probably discovering that you really like it. You like the freedom. But maybe in 2 years, you'll discover it's not exactly what it is for me. You hit another little wall and then you adjust. You're going to find it if you keep doing that because you're accumulating skills. I don't know what your job was previously to this, but you're accumulating skills with your blogging, with your podcasting. You'll accumulate more, and then someday you'll put it all together with some incredible business. So you've got to have an awareness of what you hate. If all you're thinking about is money, you won't be able to make the right choices. You'll choose a job because it's comfortable, and that's great for a couple of years. But then when they downsize you, or it's so boring, your hair's falling out, you're lost. You don't know. You don't have any. You don't know have the right skills. It's got to be you're on a journey. You're going to try things out that you think are interesting. It fits. All right, let me work on that. It doesn't fit. All right, I'm going to go in this other direction. And by the time you're 32, 33, something's going to happen if you play the game right. And I have many masters in the book that I interviewed. I interviewed 9 contemporary masters. It's always the same story. I don't know if your audience is familiar with Paul Graham and Y Combinator, but Paul, was a computer scientist, really brilliant at it, a programmer, went to Harvard. But he hated working as a consultant. He hated software. He hated working for other people. So he got into art because he thought he loved art. Then he knew he couldn't make a living at art. And then eventually, when he's 32 and he's getting tired of being poor, he has a great idea for his own business that ends up being something that he sells to Yahoo for $50 million. And his career takes off after that. But when he had that moment at the age of 32, 31, he had already accumulated so many levels of skill that he was ready to make that leap. That's where you're preparing yourself, climbing that stairway, so at a certain point, you're prepared to make that leap to something pretty awesome.
All right. Thanks for including my personal story there. And for you, when did you find out that writing was something that you wanted to do? And that this was your thing, writing? What did that look like for you?
When I met that man who was a book packager in 1995, and he asked me if I had ideas in books, I had a bit of an aha moment in thinking like, wow, books are really what I was meant to be doing. I don't care if this works out, if he doesn't end up helping me with this project. It isn't journalism. It isn't movies in Hollywood or television. This is it. And then when I started writing the 48 Laws of Power, it was like a perfect fit. This was a perfect subject for me. And if you notice, the book looks kind of peculiar. It has a very unusual structure. The way it's broken up into sections and the materials on the sides and the images and the quotes, that just like poured out of me. I mean, it just sort of like, I don't know where it came from. Those kinds of things, when that happens, you realize that it's the right thing. That's when you've hit it good. The book may have flopped, you never know, but you know that for you, it was the right thing. It really resonated with who you are. It reflects your strangeness, your weirdness, what makes you different from other people. So there were a couple light bulb moments with that first book.
And the rest would be history with your 3 best-selling books and soon to be 4th with Mastery. And still sticking on the topic of mastery, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned when you were writing Mastery?
Well, I had one personal lesson that was pretty interesting. Essentially, I was very late in delivering the book, and there's 6 chapters. I had written the introduction and 4 chapters. So the 2 chapters remained, and they were the 2 most important and longest chapters in the book. And as I was getting ready to write the 5th chapter, the publisher said, "You're taking too long. We want to publish this in the fall of 2012, and I don't think we're going to make it. You either have to finish by this date, or we're going to cancel the project, or we'll postpone it indefinitely." And that was a really bad thing for me to postpone it. I really needed it to come out in the fall. On the other hand, they were essentially giving me about 11 weeks to write half the book, and very complicated material. And I was exhausted from writing the first 4 chapters. And I just said, well, I can't do this, man. I can't do it. But I had no choice. If you know my other books, you know that in the war book, I call it death ground. You are on death ground. And death ground means when your back is to the wall, you're fighting an enemy army and you're on a beach and behind you is a wall. If you don't defeat them, they're going to slaughter you. And so because of that, you're going to fight that much harder. That's death ground. I was on death ground. And so I summoned up the energy and I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life, night and day. And it ended up being the greatest thing because the intensity of the experience made me write better, made me think better, made me more creative, made it just very intense. And what was weird is those chapters are about creativity and intuition. And I was experiencing that while I was writing those chapters because I only had a very limited amount of time to write them in. And I wasn't going to make the book bad or make those last two chapters weak. I was determined to make them better than the rest of the book. But I was living what I was writing about. So it was like confirming the ideas that I was promulgating as far as being creative and intuitive.
Can you elaborate or what was the strongest takeaway that you had from that experience?
Well, it's, we waste a lot of time. You can get things done a lot quicker, and working with a deadline is a good thing. And sometimes when you're forced to get something done, you do your best work. I mean, people in all fields talk about that. It sort of makes you realize that you yourself put a limit on what you can do. Your brain and your energy, you can do an incredible amount. But because you're insecure, you're whining, you're worried about your health, you're worried about this, that, or the other, you put a wall, you limit yourself. And you can do so much more than you're capable of. And I kind of discovered that in writing those last few chapters. I had something similar with the 50th law as well. But basically the lesson is if we're excited about something, we can accomplish so much more than we think that we can.
And I think that further proves your point with you have to find the right field. You have to find the right industry. And for you, that's writing. You really enjoy doing that. And so you're so easily able to meet that deadline. It's just further proof. And it's now time that we enter the knowledge round. Welcome to the knowledge round, where the guests will be asked rapid fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. Robert, how would you explain mastery to a newcomer? Somebody who just picked up your book at a bookstore and you're standing right next to them.
It's the ultimate form of power. It's the greatest thing you can ever have in life. Because if you're creative and you're unique and you've mastered your field, you have a ticket to whatever you want in life. Usually in this world, you have no real power. You're dependent on other people. Your boss fires you. The industry has a downturn. If you master your field, people come to you. You're able to always ride through the tough times. You're always in demand. There's nobody else who can replace you. You're one of a kind. That's the power that you have, and everybody has the potential for it. That's how I explain mastery.
And what was personally holding you back from becoming the writer that you are today?
Well, it wasn't anything personal in me. It wasn't like I was making mistakes. I hadn't found what I was meant to do. And so really it was the opposite. I didn't listen to parents and other people who were getting worried about me. I listened to myself and said, I'm going to find it eventually. It'll be a book or something that I'm going to write. So I kind of stuck to it. And it just was time. Time was the only barrier. And eventually it came together.
Okay. And what's the best advice you've ever received from a mentor?
I remember years ago, this man told me about being able to watch the grass grow. I don't know how the quote is, but it's about patience. And it's about how, there's a quote of Emerson that says the years teach us what the days can't. And he was basically saying time will sort of show you. If you're patiently growing, the grass will get green, things will happen. And it just seemed really interesting to me. I couldn't understand it, but in retrospect, it was brilliant advice, particularly to give to someone who's young. Because when you're young, you're so impatient. You really want things right away. And being able to control that I think that was, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that for years. You just asked it, and I just came back to him telling me that.
Yeah, well, glad I got it out of you, Robert. And let's go into books now. What is the most influential book that you've ever read and why?
It's hard to say. I've read thousands of books over the years. I know that Machiavelli, for my work, has perhaps had the biggest influence. I love the books of Niccolo Machiavelli because he's like that hardcore realist that I'm talking about. He, if you can imagine, seems kind of, for me here in 2013, to be writing how I write seems, fairly normal. But to write that kind of in that style back in 1513, exactly 500 years ago, interestingly, in December, it's the 500th exact anniversary of the writing of the Prince. To do that 500 years ago was pretty bold, pretty ballsy. Nobody had ever written about power, politicking, and human nature like Machiavelli. And when I read that when I was a kid, I go, wow, this is really interesting stuff. I love how he looks at people. So, it's hard to say one book, but maybe that one for the books that I've written has been the most influential.
All right, and got a scenario for you, Robert. Imagine you woke up and you were 20 again. What would you do? How would you spend your time? Would you do anything differently?
I wasted time. I wrote the book 48 Laws when I was 36, 37. If I had been smarter with my time, if I had been a little more focused, I could have done what I'd done earlier. I've saved myself 4 or 5 years. And now, I wouldn't be quite so old. I'd have more books I could write. I'd be maybe take life a little more seriously. You never have as much time as you think you do. It goes quickly. And I maybe would have, instead of thinking about that novel I wanted to write, I would have written it. It would have been terrible when I'm 25, but I would have written it. And I never wrote it because I was so worried. I think that's what I would do differently. I'd be aware of how quickly things go and work a little harder and not waste time.
So what were you worried about?
There's a lot of anxiety about, is this going to be a great book? And that's sort of what does in people, particularly in the arts, but it can also happen to you in business. You're just worried of failing. You want the thing to be so damn good and you want all the success and you don't want anything to go wrong that you never end up doing it. You never end up starting the business. You never end up writing the book or doing what you intended to do. So I would get 20, 30 pages in and then I would give it up. Oh, this isn't good. And I'd go on to something else. If I had stuck with it and I wrote 2, 3 novels and kept writing them, I would have ended up probably with something really good. But I didn't. I kept trying to redo it, come up with something else. I was impatient.
Okay, and here's another one for you. What's one action one person can take right now that would get them closer towards their goals?
It's essentially knowing about yourself and what you want and having a clear set of goals. It's really hard to manage your life if you don't have any sense of direction or purpose. You don't know, you wake up and you could go A, B, C, D, or E, and it can cripple you and you just don't know what to do with your time or where to go or whether this job is good or not or whether I should be in this relationship or not. And having a sense of clarity, not like I'm, this is exactly where I'll be in 5 years, but a sense of clarity. And that clarity can only come from knowing something about yourself and what you want in life and who you are and what makes you different. The other piece of advice I've already touched upon, but maybe I'll hit it home a little harder, is a lot of people are afraid to be themselves. So if you notice anybody who's successful in any field in business or sports or the arts, you can say there's nobody else out there like them. They're one of a kind and you have that potential. So I guess the other thing is to not be so afraid of going in your own direction, of doing something that nobody else is doing, or starting a business that's not out there, or writing something that's what's going to actually make you stand out from the crowd. So.
All right, now, Robert, getting deep, if you had to write your obituary today, what would it say?
Yeah, I guess I led a pretty blessed life. When I think about it, I just can't believe how lucky I've been. No really major illnesses, knock on wood. Everything kind of falling into piece together in the right way. I just feel really blessed like that. So there's that quote of Da Vinci that I love that I put in Mastery, and it goes like, just as after a day of hard work brings a blessed sleep, a life well lived brings a blessed death. So the feeling that you kind of did, you accomplished what you could accomplish, you reach your potential, makes you feel it's okay to die. You've done what you wanted to do. Maybe something to that effect,
And I got another deep one for you. What is your philosophy on life?
Trying to, I come back to that realism is trying to see things as they are. And it's not a negative thing. It's not like everything that you're looking at realistically is dark or ugly or bad. Some of it is like looking at just, the things around you and appreciating them, seeing them as they are, seeing, how amazing it is that the life started on the planet 3 billion years ago. If you read my book, 50th Law, Chapter 10 on the sublime, it's pretty awesome thinking about, we were chimps 6,000 years ago and here we are now. A lot of thoughts like that can be very inspiring and make you think, wow, it's pretty amazing to be alive. That's kind of part of this realism thing is just looking how things are as opposed to all of these abstractions and things that come from other people that aren't who you are or what, So maybe that would be my philosophy of life. And I do, for over 3 years now, I've been meditating. I do a form of Zen meditation. I really got into it from my war book when I did heavily into Zen Buddhism and warfare. And that kind of philosophy of a way of looking at life, sort of accepting things as they are, which is sort of the heart of Zen Buddhism, I think is very much appeals and resonates with me.
And Robert, do you have any parting piece of guidance for the thousands of listeners today?
Things have a way of coming to you if you play it right. And, you never quite know what that is when you're in the moment, when you're in the present. Things might look bad or whatever. But if you follow some of the things that I'm talking about in Mastery, stuff is going to come to you in a weird way. Opportunities are going to come to you and you're going to recognize them and you're going to exploit them. So it's hard to realize if you're depressed in the moment or you're feeling down about yourself or about your career. If you have a plan and you're kind of moving towards it, you don't have to worry so much about what's happening right now. Things are going to come to you. It sounds kind of mystical. And if you read the book, I make it a little less mystical, particularly in chapter 6. But I'm trying to say that I want you to be the ultimate opportunist in life. There's so many opportunities around you, but most people aren't seeing them. They're not picking them up. They're not realizing it. If I didn't realize that meeting this man was the opportunity of a life to write the book, The 48 Laws of Power, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So it's more like preparing yourself for those great moments that come.
All right, Robert, and as we're coming to a close, what's exciting you today? What are you currently working on?
Well, I'm basically about to go to Brazil on Saturday for a book tour. That's pretty exciting. I'm working on my new book. Basically, in the Mastery, I have a chapter on social intelligence, and I'm sort of expanding that into a book. Basically, how to understand people, human nature, how to read people, how to know what makes them so weird, so you can figure them out and decode them and not be operating in the dark. That's my new book, so I'm working on that. And then we're trying to turn one of either my first or second book into a television project. So I'm working on that as well, which should be fun.
I'm really interested in that book. Do you have plans for a release date?
Books take a couple of years for me. So, that's my only plan is just to stay alive and write it. And it'll be out in a couple of years. I do plan this book. I'm going to blog a little bit in advance of the book and not disappear for so many years. So I will be teasing the public or my readers with some things from the new book, but it will take a couple of years.
You got a lot of really exciting things going for you with the TV show, trip to Brazil, got a new book that I'm definitely going to get on. Well, Robert, go ahead and give yourself a plug so the audience can get in contact with you in the future.
My website is www.powerseductionandwar.com. The and is spelled out, powerseductionandwar.com. There's links to the new website for Mastery. We have another site and my Twitter account and my Facebook stuff. So maybe that's the center of gravity there, powerseductionandwar.com.
All right, I'll put all that in the show notes.
Okay.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story, your life lessons, and about your books and your philosophies with us today.
Thank you.
And there you have it. That's going to wrap up episode 3 with Robert Greene. And Robert's actually one of my favorite authors. So to have him on this show in such a short amount of time, really means a lot to me. And it goes to show that for all of the listeners who have ideas, they have projects that they want to work on or that they put away, get to it. Make it happen. Start taking action. And with time, consistent action will build up and you can make some incredible things happen. For me, this is huge. Like just getting this podcast up and having Robert Greene and the past 2 guests that I had were amazing. So I challenge you to take action on something. I know you have something, you're thinking about it now, and I challenge you to go and do that. Do the first step. You don't have to complete the entire project, but take the first step. Whatever it is, you got to make a phone call. You got to start writing. You got to get some plans. You got to hire somebody. Take that first step. And then the next day, do one more step. Next week, take a couple more steps. And maybe you take a break. Maybe you take a break for a few days, but then you get back at it. You reassess what you're doing, then you just keep going. Because with time, you're gonna have something there for you. You're gonna have a nice asset there waiting for you. All right. Well, if you do like what this podcast is doing, the Knowledge for Men podcast, please, I'd appreciate a review on iTunes. Just ratings, reviews. It really helps support the rankings of the podcast, and it allows more people to hear it. So just a few seconds or a minute of your time can really make an impact on a lot of people. All right, guys. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast show. It's been a pleasure having you be a part of a thriving community of men who want to crush it in all aspects of life. I'm on a mission here to inspire millions of guys, and with your help, we're going to make a dent in the universe. Check out knowledgeformen.com for a ton of free content that's designed to help you live a remarkable life. Again, that's knowledgeformen.com. I hope to see you there. And always remember, 2014 is the official year of the crush, where we take action to get the life we've always dreamed of. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and until next time, let's do it.